If you're a big music fan, which I hope you are if you're watching this video and subscribe to this channel, think about all the different albums you love across different genres, different eras. If you're like me, there'll be many different records from many different decades, many different styles of music. But think, how many of those albums can you comfortably listen to front to back with zero skips? To me, sometimes there can be a difference between a great album and one that you can get through without skipping anything. So today, I'm picking a handful of records from the 1960s that are zero skip albums. This is the beginning of a new video series where I'm going to basically take albums from a certain decade or era and list at least a few of them that I think, personally, I can get through without skipping any tracks. Now, for this video and this entire series, there's just going to be one rule. There's only one album per artist per video. For instance, since I'm doing the 60s here, I'm not going to be able to pick multiple Beatles albums, and for my 70s video, I'm not going to be able to pick multiple Pink Floyd albums. Make sense? Good, then let's get right down to it. I'll get to my Zero Skips Beatles album in just a bit, but for this list, I'm going to start off with what I think is my favorite Bob Dylan album and one that's his best output from the 60s, in my opinion. That album is 1965's Highway 61 Revisited. Bob Dylan had some seriously high quality output in the 60s, and there are a few albums that can qualify as no-skip records. For me though, his work on Highway 61 Revisited is second to none. The only thing that comes close in his discography, in my opinion, is 1975's Blood on the Tracks. So what makes Bob Dylan's sixth album so consistent? Maybe it's the fact that Dylan had kind of come into his own by 1965 following a 4-album run that started with 1963's The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. I think since that record, on each album, his vocals, his writing, his lyrical prowess had improved more and more, and his evolution culminated with a pair of brilliant albums in 65. There's this one, and then there was Bringing It All Back Home, which was released earlier in 65. On Highway 61 Revisited, he sets the stage right away with Like a Rolling Stone, which is one of his most recognizable and iconic songs. Now, many times when an album starts off with such an iconic cut, there's nowhere to go but down, but in the case of Highway 61 Revisited, there's no quality drop-off. As the album goes on, Tombstone Blues, Ballad of a Thin Man, and Desolation Row continue the same level of quality, but the important thing here and what makes this a no-skip album is that those deeper cuts are still really good tracks. Many of these songs really across the album, whether it's a deep cut or marquee single, exhibits that cryptic lyrical style from Bob Dylan that really started to emerge after the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. I would say From a Buick 6 is probably the weakest cut on this album, but still incredibly strong. I'm even over that blues rock trend that really punctuated American and British music at the time, but Dylan actually makes it work on this song with some dark and attention-grabbing lyrics. One thing about Bob Dylan, whether you love him, whether you hate him, whether you're indifferent to him, is that his music brings a ton of personality and flair. He was a poet, he was a bard, and while the music sometimes takes a backseat to his lyrics, on Highway 61 Revisited, he mixes folk rock with contemporary folk soundscapes, and it really works all around. Front to back, Bob Dylan's sixth album is a classic for me and has exactly zero skips. One of the most creative and whimsical minds in 20th century music is Frank Zappa. He boasts an incredibly impressive catalog that spans 3 decades, and while he wasn't really a marquee name during his lifetime, he's really achieved a huge cult following since his death. In the mid-60s, he started out with his group, the Mothers of Invention, and released 5 albums by 1969. It was at the end of that year, right at the end of the decade, that Zappa decided to break up the Mothers of Invention temporarily. At that point, he went solo, and his first output is 1969's Hot Rats, which is a no-skip album. It's fantastic from front to back. Don't get me wrong, I loved Zappa with the Mothers of Invention, but Hot Rats is just on another level. Much of his work with the Mothers was more psychedelic and experimental, though you could kind of start to hear a jazz rock influence starting on their second album, 1967's Absolutely Free. Hot Rats doubles down on the jazz rock and jazz fusion styles that were pretty hot at that time, and he mixes in elements of progressive rock and what would later become the jam band style. Now, maybe it's not fair to make this a no-skip album, as it does only have 6 tracks, but 3 of them are extended compositions. You have the 9.5-minute Willie the Pimp, the 9-minute Son of Mr. Green Jeans, and the stunning, winding 13-minute The Gumbo Variations. Peaches and Regalia is a fantastic opener and keeps the whimsicality and uniqueness of Frank Zappa, while also keeping things jazzy and energetic. The other deeper cuts, Little Umbrella and It Must Be a Camel, are extremely solid as well. But for me, it's Willie the Pimp, and Zappa's childhood friend, Captain Beefheart, makes an appearance and delivers the only vocals on this entire album. Beefheart's guest appearance is just superb. He uses his gruff, raw voice over such a funky, bouncy instrumental that makes this song the standout of Hot Rats. More from Captain Beefheart in a little bit. Hot Rats Rats is just excellent. Like I said, it's mostly an instrumental album aside from Captain Beefheart on Willie the Pimp. But to think that this was made in 1969 is just incredible. This thing sounds like it was made maybe 10 or 15 years later. The production is crystal clear. Now, Zappa was always ahead of his time, whether it came to songwriting or instrumentation, and Hot Rats is a perfect example. This is about as easy as it gets for me for a 60s no-skip album. Jazz music is a massive part of the 60s that needs to be acknowledged in the same vein as rock, psychedelic rock, folk rock, blues rock. Jazz was a little more influential earlier in the 60s before rock music really started to break out in the middle of the decade. My favorite jazz album of all time comes from that era, and it's Charles Mingus's 1963 The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady. I don't know, jazz it's kind of a weird choice for a no-skips album, as The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady has exactly 4 tracks with 6 musical passages. But I mean, these are still extended compositions, and this is a full-length album, and all of the compositions, every single part of the music on this album is just absolutely fantastic and should be treated the same way as like a 15 or 17 track album. The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady is a perfect album for me, and here's why. The album transcends the hard bop and third stream jazz movements of the time and shows Mingus in his peak. While he had some quality output dating back to the mid-50s, he really did hit a stride in the first half of the 60s. The post-bop, hard bop, third stream styles were sort of transcended as you have elements like a flamenco guitar brought into the B-side of the album. And then every song is dripping with these decadent horns. Most passages utilize a muted trumpet, which gives this thing a wonderfully sleazy, debaucherous sound. It transports me to a dark, rainy night in the big city in the 50s and 60s where we've all had one too many martinis. Maybe there's some debaucherous dancing going on. I don't know, the vibe on this album is fantastic. I don't even have a favorite track on here. Every track is 5 out of 5 stars in my book. I love the plotting energy of the first track, Solo Dancers, and there are some remarkable passages in the final track, Trio and Group Dancers. The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady does get its recognition as one of the best jazz albums of all time, but I do think that it lives in the shadow of works by Coltrane and Miles Davis from the same era. Personally, I think it's the greatest jazz album in existence, and The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady should be right up there with any and all of the other contemporary jazz works from that era. The singer-songwriter genre really came into its own in the 60s. It was punctuated by the contemporary folk of names like Bob Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel, but then you had artists like Jackson C. Frank, Townes Van Zandt, and Neil Young, who kind of mixed country with folk, and it was like this country folk rock mishmash that really came out in the second half of the 60s. Regardless of the style, folk artists were kind of known as these lone wolf, sad, lonely, poetic types. They had a sort of mystique to them, but I don't think any artist was as mysterious or poetic as Leonard Cohen, especially on his debut album, 1967's Songs of Leonard Cohen. While Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel often had sort of more upbeat, rock-oriented soundscapes at times, not all the time, Leonard Cohen kept it pretty minimalistic on his debut with just really acoustic guitar parts and his vocals for most songs. And there wasn't much else going on musically. This kind of was done on purpose, as Cohen definitely wanted the listener to focus on the lyrics, and Cohen had this mystical, mysterious sadness to him. You could tell he was in a funk, but the way he explained it to listeners often had them scratching their heads a little bit. Everything was very cryptic, and Master Song, the second track, is a great example of what I'm talking about here, as he tells the story of this unknown person that he at the same time seems infatuated with. The Stranger Song further explores these concepts by speaking directly to someone, though we never know exactly who he's talking about, and there's a lot of moments on this album that are like that. Every time I listen to The Stranger Song and a number of other cuts, I always wonder, who's he talking to? There are definitely some more well-known songs which are basically folk rock canon at this point. You have the excellent Pastoral Suzanne and So Long Marianne, which are kind of the 2 lead songs off of here. Cohen in these cases comes out of his shell and seems to be talking about particular people. So Long Marianne features a chamber pop type chorus with some strong female background vocals. The song is actually a little bit autobiographical to the point where he's telling his story about a woman he met in Greece and fell in love with, before the two inevitably split up, eventually resulting in this song. Cohen was a musician, but foremost he was an actual poet, and the song Suzanne is one of his poems that was converted into a song about a platonic female friend. The way the 2 lead singles were delivered is nothing short of incredible, and kind of seeing this more personable side of Leonard Cohen was really refreshing, and he does get very dark and secretive on a lot of the other tracks, and I think kind of the back and forth between these 2 moods is incredible. It gives this thing sonic diversity, and this is an album that doesn't have a ton of musical diversity, but it definitely sounds different when he gets into these more accessible songs. And folk rock, let's be honest, it's not really known for its diversity. A lot of the songs can really run together. If there's one criticism I have about Bob Dylan's catalog, it's that. You don't get nearly as much of this on Songs of Leonard Cohen, as he invites the listener into his dark, mysterious, cryptic world. At the same time, he reveals that he's shockingly vulnerable and human. Songs of Leonard Cohen is an an incredible album. It's probably my favorite folk album of all time, and there are 0 skips here as well. I mentioned the Beatles at the top of the video, and again, the rule is 1 album per artist per video. The Beatles have as many as 4 potential no-skip albums: Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's, and Abbey Road. Of the 4 of these, Abbey Road is my favorite, and in my eyes, front to back perfection. In the second half of the 60s, the Beatles were no longer a touring band. They were kind of a studio-only outfit, and they still somehow maintained their popularity. And as the 60s went on, they experimented with psychedelia a bit more and married it to their seemingly simple versions of upbeat pop rock songs. On Abbey Road, I think these 2 styles combined in the best way possible, and Lennon and McCartney's songwriting is just top of the line here. And the entire 4-piece as a band was executing musically like never before. Some of the Beatles' best songs are on here: the iconic Come Together, the emotional McCartney piece Oh Darling, the heavy, winding I Want You, She's So Heavy, followed immediately by the light, upbeat Here Comes the Sun, and the unbelievably executed 8-track medley at the end of the album, which features a number of little bite-sized 1 to 2 minute songs that end up kind of playing as one full song. All of the deeper cuts on this album, maybe save for that 23-second outro Her Majesty, are absolutely worth your time every time. So I guess if Her Majesty isn't worth your time, does that make it a skip? My answer is no, because you've had 46 minutes of musical bliss to this point. So what's another 23 seconds of some stupid little outro? I guarantee you have time to polish that off after what you've heard leading up to that point. Listen, it's no secret that the Beatles' late-stage discography contains some of the most critically acclaimed albums of all time, and rightfully so. But in my opinion, Abbey Road is their finest album. It shows the Beatles executing at their highest possible level. The songwriting of Lennon and McCartney is second to none. And track-wise, this is the opposite of the Black Saint and the Sinner Lady. This is, instead of 4 tracks, it's 17, so it's really hard to find a no-skip album with that many tracks, which really just speaks to the fact that Abbey Road is just a flawless album. Abbey Road, just one of my favorite albums of the 60s, and every time I listen to it, I don't dare think about skipping anything, not even Her Majesty at the end. Okay, so I'm gonna do one more album here. I'm only including 6 albums for my 60s no-skip list, as a lot of them are Beatles and Bob Dylan albums if I were to build this list out. I also don't think there was as much output in the 60s as in future decades. The 70s are going to see a lot more of this, and I'm considering doing a 2-part video. Modern music was really still kind of finding its footing in the first half of the 60s, so the overall output from the decade isn't quite as robust. So let's get to it. My 6th and final album is an artist that I actually mentioned earlier. He did vocals on the 2nd track of Frank Zappa's Hot Rats, Willie the Pimp, and that is the amazing and seminal Captain Beefheart. In the 60s, Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band released 3 critically acclaimed albums, culminating with the manic, chaotic, and experimental Trout Mask Replica in 1969. It was a mishmash of styles, and it was this borderline unhinged mess, but it has become Beefheart's signature composition. I think their first album, 1967's Safe as Milk, should take that honor. For me, it's a 0-skip record, and the last entry for this video. This is a quick 33-minute album with nothing exceeding the 4-minute mark. It's very digestible, and it does slow down a little bit in quality on the B-side, but everything, even the deep cuts, are fantastic. For me, the opener, Sure Enough and Yes I Do, perfectly sets the stage for this album, as it's a bluesy, psychedelic, garage rock masterpiece of a song. The album as a whole is fairly raw, full of a lot of fuzz and analog production that also doesn't sound too lo-fi or antiquated. The album has an overall upbeat vibe with a lot of experimental rock touches. Songs like Zigzag Wanderer and Electricity. I'm Glad is a gorgeous doo-wop leaning song that has some incredible vocal harmonies, and Captain Beefheart's crooning on this song, wow, it's captivating, it's amazing. Autumn's Child is an excellent psychedelic closer to the album, and Plastic Factory is one of my favorite deep cuts. Regardless if it's a song I mentioned or a deep cut, everything on here is worth my time at least. I hope it's worth yours too. If you're not as familiar with this album, please go check it out. There are 3 or 4 perfect songs on here, and everything that's not a perfect song is still a must listen. This album flies a little bit under the radar, both in relation to Trout Mask Replica and also due to the fact that Beefheart was not one of the marquee names of the 60s. Like high school friend and frequent collaborator Frank Zappa, who was actually the producer for Trout Mask Replica, Beefheart came from a bit more of an alternative sect that was more experimental, unorthodox, and unconventional. Okay, so while the overall musical output of the 60s didn't quite pique my interest like future decades will, there are still many great albums that are very close to no-skip records that don't quite make the cut. Here are some honorable mentions. King Crimson's 1969 debut, In the Court of the Crimson King, is a trailblazing record. It's fantastic early progressive rock that's one of the finest albums of the entire genre, and it's often heralded as one of the best albums of all time, regardless of genre. It only has 5 tracks. That seems like a slam dunk for for a no-skipper, right? Well, if it weren't for Moonchild, that would be the case. Moonchild is this fairly pointless improvisational track. It's just the band noodling around a little bit, and it honestly sounds stupid, and it's 12 minutes long. You replace this with a similar quality to any of the other 4 tracks on this record, and In the Court of the Crimson King is a bona fide no-skipper. Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys is another record that is often considered one of the best of all time. I think this album is, just like Abbey Road, a little bit busy when it comes to the track list, but the difference is the B-side kind of falls off a little bit. The A-side is heat from front to back. You cannot miss on that album's A-side. But cuts like I Know There's an Answer and Here Today don't really do it for me as much. I think the highs on Pet Sounds are incredible, but the lows are closer to average than I'd like to see for a no-skip record. The Velvet Underground and Nico's 1967 debut is yet again one of the best albums of all time, but I actually think that German singer Nico kind of hurts this thing at times. Her voice is a little bit ridiculous and almost comical. The song All Tomorrow's Parties has never resonated with me. I'll Be Your Mirror is just cheesy, and the strange experimental Black Angel's Death song is just weird. There's some fantastic songs on here like Femme Fatale, Heroin, I'm Waiting for the Man, Sunday Morning. So the highs are among the best of all time, but the lows are just kind of annoying. Some of Led Zeppelin's most heralded work comes from the late 60s. They released Led Zeppelin 1 and 2 both in 1969. They were each some of the most celebrated blues rock albums from the era. Now, I've talked about Led Zeppelin. I like them, I like the music, but I take them with a grain of salt. Just because they were one of these bands that was capitalizing off of blues and African-American art form and not really paying tribute to or residuals to the originators. Zeppelin and artists like Cream, they were just cashing in off of these styles that they had nothing to do with. I will say that if you can look past this, Zeppelin 1 is an incredibly enjoyable album, punctuated in excellent psychedelic rock songs like Dazed and Confused and Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. Communication Breakdown is an outstanding early hard rock song predating heavier bands like Black Sabbath. However, the very bluesy You Shook Me and the overly folky Black Mountainside, they're just weaker tracks. They're skips for me. Finally, the Jimi Hendrix Experience had 3 fantastic albums spanning 1967 and 1968, the finest of which, in my opinion, is their debut, 1967's Are You Experienced? This once again takes blues, mixes it with rock, and doesn't do anything for the originators, but it has a little bit more charm as it's quite a bit more psychedelic than an album like Zeppelin 1. There's a US and there's a UK version of this album, and on the US version, I think some of the songs on here have some of the best guitar work from the entire era. But there are songs like Love or Confusion, May This Be Love, or Third Stone from the Sun. I think they bloat the album. They're not on the same level as songs like Fire, Purple Haze, Foxy Lady, and The Wind Cries Mary. What are your no-skip albums from the 1960s? Do you agree with my picks? Drop me a comment below. Let me know what albums from the 60s you love and why you consider them no-skip albums, or maybe you don't. Maybe you love some of these albums or other albums, but there's a track or two that you don't agree with. Let me know why. Let's talk about it. I'm excited to kick off this video series. This was great doing this, and you can take it to the bank that I'll be back with more from future decades.